Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. At 1 o'clock, we are going to hear from the RCMP as they provide an update on an escaped convicted murderer, Rabi Al-Khalil. We'll bring that to you live on our streaming platform, CBC News BC, and on YouTube. On the open line, Canada's youth unemployment rate has edged up to 14.6%. We'll hear from the BC Conservatives who say it's time we had a youth job strategy. What would that look like and what's needed to help young people find work? We're taking your calls on that. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Thanks for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, live streaming as well on YouTube, on CBC News BC. We also have our TikTok live running right now. You can call us on our top story as well. This whole hour, we are asking you, what should a youth job strategy look like and what's needed to help Canada's young people find work? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also just hit pound 690 on your cell phone, or our email is bctoday@cbc.ca, and you can comment on the TikTok Live. Well, young people are pounding the pavement, knocking on doors, and sending in those applications, but Canada's youth are not having much luck finding work. The latest job numbers show youth unemployment edged up to 14.6%. That's the highest rate since 2010, excluding the pandemic years. That rate had already been trending up over the past 2 years, and last week's numbers fueled calls to either reform or even cancel Canada's temporary foreign worker program. Last Friday, I spoke with BC's Jobs and Economic Growth Minister Ravi Kahlon.
We have, of course, a need for temporary foreign workers in agriculture, in some smaller communities where it's hard to get access, the talent you need for your business. But there's a lot of employers that have now essentially built their entire business plans on temporary foreign workers, where they put up postings and they don't really try to hire somebody locally, and they're just trying to get someone and they can pay them a lower wage.
That's BC's Jobs Minister Ravi Kahlon. Meanwhile, the BC Conservatives are calling for a youth job strategy, calling it a crisis of youth unemployment. We'll hear from MLA Trevor Halford in just a moment. And again, we're taking your calls right now. What do you think a youth job strategy should look like? And how do we help young people find jobs in Canada? Call us now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone, or you can dial 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Our email again is bctoday@cbc.ca, and our TikTok Live is up. You can comment there. And I'm told we did have some technical difficulties for our CBC Radio 1 listeners, and that it is up and running now. So I apologize for those issues, and they are now resolved. So glad to have you with us. Trevor Halford is a BC Conservative MLA for Surrey White Rock and joins me now. Hi, good afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Why do you think the youth unemployment situation has become so bad?
A few reasons. Actually, it's funny because I just got a call from my son who was on his lunch break. He's 17 years old, and he was out actually putting applications out to try and get some employment for the fall. So, the challenges are real in my house for sure. But listen, we're hearing that from a lot of people right now, especially our youth, that they're struggling to find employment. And, these are individuals that are just trying to get in the door of the sectors, whether it be tourism, whether it be, the restaurant industry, and they're really struggling. And I think that's a sign that things are going in the wrong direction here.
What do you think is behind it?
Well, I think a number of things. I represent Surrey White Rock, and 95% of the businesses out here are small businesses. And, I think they're feeling absolutely stretched right now on a number of fronts. And, they're finding it very challenging. Also, too, with the affordability issues we're having right now, not a lot of people are finding it, a little bit of a stretch to go out and have that dinner out or seek that entertainment. So, that's having a ripple effect. But, the small businesses out here, at least the ones I'm chatting to, are saying like we are getting tapped out. And, when that happens, some of the things they have to do is they have to cut back on hours and they have to cut back on staffing.
I wonder to what extent uncertainty is influencing their decision making right now. You know, there have been some experts who say, well, the trade war is just keeping businesses kind of status quo and not wanting to expand, not wanting to do any more hiring, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. But I agree with that. But even before the trade war started, the cost of everything was going up dramatically. When you look at grocery prices and things like that. So, if you're a restaurant and, you're seeing a head of lettuce go up by 75% and other things like that is very, very damaging. And, they're feeling very tapped out. And, ultimately that's going to have an effect on how they hire. And, that burden is going to be absorbed by our young people, unfortunately.
So what would the BC Conservatives like to see in a job strategy for youth?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that we need to be looking at right away. And number one, and I always, the small business was the way that food was put on my table growing up, with both my parents owning small businesses here. But again, I think we have to find a way to connect small businesses and youth. And, whether that's some incentive programs that we can look at, but also too is trying to take some of the burden off of our businesses. I look at, how we had an incident here 2 weeks ago where glass got smashed. And I was talking to the owner and, that's a $2,000 bill that he's got. And I said, well, what did you do? He goes, I just paid it. And I just paid it because, if I go through my insurance, the deductible is going to be so high and I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And so they're just absorbing those costs. But ultimately, they're having to deal with that bottom line, and that may impact some hiring challenges. So, it's supporting, supporting small businesses when it comes to vandalism and theft. We've got a situation here at our grocery stores where, they're watching people walk out with thousands of dollars of merchandise each day. So, they're not hiring cashiers, they're actually hiring security guards. So, and we want to see people hired, but the big challenge is that they're saying, we're not getting support from government and we need to change that.
So from your perspective, it's more the environment in which these, in particular, the small businesses are operating in, that's making it less likely for them to want to hire more people. Is that right?
I think that's a big part of it because, when small business is doing well, they're going to hire more and wages are going to go up. And I think that's a benefit for everybody, and it's a definite benefit for our economy. And right now we're seeing is that instead of that, they're scaling back, and a lot of owners are actually taking shifts themselves, right? Because they can't afford to bring somebody else on, or in some cases they may have to cut hours, and that's definitely something we don't want to see. But when you drive around right now, it's not only the challenges we're seeing in youth unemployment, but we're seeing a lot of these businesses actually close their doors. And, it's something, especially in my area, that we've never seen that kind of volume before, but people are just saying that we can't handle it anymore.
Trevor, what do you make of the debate that's being generated around the temporary foreign worker program in particular as a result of these unemployment numbers?
Well, I think a couple things come to mind. And one is that BC as a province, we have to have more control, more say when it comes to immigration. We absolutely do. It affects every aspect of our lives, whether it's employment, whether it's healthcare. There's every aspect's affected by that. That being said, there's different areas where we need to make sure that we have structured programs for temporary foreign workers. For instance, agriculture. In some cases, I know there can be challenges with tourism in some remote communities. So looking at that thing, it's not a one-size-fits-all model, but I think that it's definitely past its due point here, where we've got to figure out what's working and what's not. Every province is different, and BC's no stranger to that. But the program is not working the way it should, and I think everybody realizes that at this point.
Okay, sounds very similar then to what we're hearing from the NDP government from my conversation with Ravi Kahlon. What do you think will be the response then from the Prime Minister on this? What he said last week was something like that we need a program like the TFW program, but that it perhaps needs to be more specific. What do you make of that response?
Well, they're all generalities, right? And I think until, the frustration that I have is that quite often this NDP government will point to Ottawa and say, we're waiting. But we don't see that, whether it's bill reform or now this. And the fact is that we need movement on this because, again, it's affecting every every aspect of our day-to-day lives. And so I'm hopeful that we'll get something more than just an announcement, but we'll get some policy soon. But we have to, but it should start with the fact that BC needs to be at the table and have a say in controlling immigration that's coming into our province.
My guest is Trevor Halford, the BC Conservative MLA for Surrey White Rock, and his colleague Gavin Dew, who is a critic for the jobs, has been calling for a youth jobs strategy. And so we are asking you, what do you think a youth job strategy should look like, and what is needed to help young people find work? Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or you can just hit pound 690. Our email, bctoday@cbc.ca, and we are live on TikTok. Let's go to our callers now. Jan is calling from Texada Island. Hi, Jan. Welcome. What are your thoughts?
Hi. As soon as I heard it was about youth employment, I thought of an idea that's being championed by the Climate Emergency Unit for several years now. So there's a youth-led movement fighting for a national youth climate corps. And the idea is that anybody under the age of 35 would be eligible to get a green job that would be funded federally. And I think this is a great idea because it's addressing two issues that are crucial right now, which is both youth unemployment and the need to not burn ourselves up. And
so the opportunities that provides or poses, perhaps,
Yeah, I mean, just one example of the sort of thing that takes some work to do, but it's really an environmental benefit, is to make places fire smart by burning dead branches and so on. But if you just open burn them, all you end up with is ash and smoke. It's really not good. But if you burn them in a restricted oxygen environment, which can just be a pit actually or a trench, you can create biochar, and when that's mixed with soil, with compost, you end up enriching the soil and enhancing its ability to store carbon. That's just one example of the kind of work we need to be doing now, Yeah. There's so much work needs to be done.
It's a really interesting point, Jan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Janet is calling now from New West. Hi, Janet.
Hello.
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, it was on youth employment, but just a comment ahead of time. Immigration is a red herring because these people on the Temporary Foreign Workers Program have absolutely no access to being included as immigrants. They have no access to those kinds of programs. So that's first off. Secondly, the main reason that they don't hire local youth for jobs at Subway, Tim Hortons, McDonald's, whatever else, is that they offer them shifts that go from, say, 6 to 10, that go from 2 till 8. Those are interfering with school time, and those are common. And that's exactly what they do. They offer youth shifts that will interfere with schoolwork.
Okay.
And I know that from personal experience in our family, in that there are two kids that I know, two of my relatives, who were in that position, and guess what? Neither one of them finished school.
Because of the shifts that they had to take.
They get the shift, they love the money. They ask them on Sunday evening when they finish their last shift, oh, by the way, can you come in on Wednesday at 2 o'clock?
Right.
And or till 8?
Yeah, that's a good point. Janet, thank you very much for raising that, and thanks for sharing your family stories as well. Take care.
I've seen exactly one ad, one time, in the window, advertising for positions at one of the fast food places. Exactly.
Okay. Janet, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in here because the point that you make about shift times, I'm going to put to Trevor Halford, who is joining us, BC Conservative MLA for Surrey White Rock. You deal with so many small businesses, right? I mean, are they actually, yes, are the jobs that they're offering shifts that can be taken by people who are students?
It depends too, right? And I think there can be, and that's part of it is, getting the employers at the table and, realizing that in some cases they need to adapt. I'm also, we've been talking about, youth unemployment, but I also, represent an area that is predominantly seniors as well. And when we're talking about the affordability issues, a lot of them are looking to get back in the workforce to pay their bills. But, I think that's part of the strategy that, we can be talking about is making sure we get everybody at the table, whether it's, large employers, whether they're, fast food outlets and things like that understand the dynamics and some of the changes that we need to adapt to and how that would work for them and how that would work for potential employees as well.
We have an email from James, kind of in Vancouver, sort of on this point as well. He writes, the biggest barriers are experience expectations from employers across industries. So for entry-level jobs, they still expect years of experience despite offering a lower wage. Employers expect full-time commitment from part-time workers. James, thank you. You can send us your thoughts as well, bctoday@cbc.ca. I see lots of emails coming in now. We'll try to get to them as much as we can as well. Richard is on the line, though, from Victoria right now. What do you think is needed to help young people find work, Richard?
Well, before I make a comment on the young people, I just want to just briefly say regarding temporary foreign workers, one thing that I don't really hear talked about that much lately, seems like the conversation keeps getting around to immigration is bad or it's good or it's necessary, but the reality is that here in Canada, our governments for some time now have completely dropped the ball in terms of having the infrastructure in place to handle an influx of people, whether that's students or temporary foreign workers, whether it's housing or healthcare, transportation, etc. That's the primary reason I think why maybe something like the temporary foreign workers program has to be restricted for a while or whatever, cut back, because we simply have not provided the infrastructure. As we know, we don't even have the proper infrastructure right now for people who are born and lived in British Columbia their whole lives. Regarding young people, just yesterday I happened to have had a conversation with the manager of a small business, an establishment that employs, I think, about 33 people. And about, I would say 90% of those are 30 years or younger. And he told me the primary problem with hiring and keeping staff is that the vast majority of young people that come in with applications only want to work 20 hours a week. And that might sound like, well, a good idea, great, because they've got another job or they want to have a good lifestyle, all admirable stuff. But from the employer's perspective, that creates massive complications in terms of who should qualify for benefits and who shouldn't, and how do we work this into our scheduling. And then you have full-time employees, 40-hour-a-week people, or even more, some saying, well, gee, can I cherry pick? I want to go home early on Mondays and Fridays, so I want a 36-hour week. It just seems to be a trend these days that young people have a different expectation, and I don't want to put a negative connotation on that and say that they're lazier than they used to be or they're less ambitious. Maybe they're healthier minded. They want a better kind of lifestyle, but it simply does not jive with the requirements that a lot of small businesses have, especially when they've had the crap kicked out of them by the draconian COVID restrictions that were put on them and the expenses on those small businesses. They haven't even had a chance to recover. Now they've got massive shoplifting costs and things like that. And suddenly they're expected to somehow accommodate people who only want to work 20 hours a week.
Yeah. Is it generational? Yeah. Richard, thank you so much. Let's go back to Trevor on that. I don't know if you know, and you're right, Richard. I take your point about not generalizing or making it a negative, giving it a negative connotation. But are there that generational distinctions when it comes to expectations with work and work-life balance that perhaps small businesses need to also be mindful of?
Yeah. So as a father of two teenage boys, I can say that, there's a definite hunger to get out and get in the workforce. And I'm seeing that from a lot of youth out here. And I think that it's obviously generations have, different things and they're, different skill sets. But I'll say this is that the youth that are coming out today, are very, very, I think, well equipped to handle getting into the workforce, and that should be promoted. And that's the best way to make sure that people are getting ready, whether they're paying for college, paying for their car, paying rent. But the youth that I'm seeing out here is, they want an opportunity, and that's the biggest thing is that everybody needs an opportunity to get in the door and go from there.
And you mentioned, your two sons. You mentioned that there are many seniors in your riding, but Surrey also being a very young and growing community. What do you think youth unemployment means for a community like Surrey? What's the impact?
Well, it's a struggle, and your caller just talked about it before, Richard, there in terms of lack of infrastructure, and we're seeing that dramatically in Surrey over the last number of years. And for us, is in Surrey again, it is predominantly done by small business, and we want people to live here and to stay here and to work here. And so but in order to do that, we've got to have opportunities. And I always believe that government should not always be the employer, but government needs to make sure that the private sector has an ability to create jobs. And we've seen that kind of been suffocated over the last number of years, and that has to end. And when we're talking about a youth strategy, we really need to focus on that. Is how do we make it easier for small businesses or employers of any size to employ our youth?
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Trevor Halford is the MLA for Surrey White Rock. It's 12:28. This is BC Today. And on the topic of the temporary foreign worker program, which both the Premier in BC, David Eby, and the federal Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, have said should be either cancelled or reformed. We got a lot of emails on that on Friday. Claude writes, I also agree with the province and or federal government scrapping the foreign workers temporary work bill. We must help our Canadian workers first. Excuse me, the same legal enforcement should be applied when it comes to either documented or undocumented workers, period. Jessica writes in Colwood, my 16-year-old stepson applied to several fast food places this summer. He's clean-cut, polite, and well-spoken. He did not receive a call back from a single place. I can't help but think they advertised the job opening only to meet the foreign worker hiring rules. Roger writes from Victoria, we as a country already experienced severe consequences during the early days of pandemic recovery when TFWs were not yet allowed to come back into the country. Businesses that depend on these workers either closed or throttled down their store hours in retail settings due to staff shortages. Banning temporary foreign workers based on high unemployment rates is a knee-jerk reaction and not based on actual labor evidence. The jobs filled by temporary foreign workers will simply go unfilled rather than filled by young workers, forcing businesses to throttle down activity. Thanks so much for your emails. You can always send us your thoughts, bctoday@cbc.ca. .30 now, and you're with BC Today here on CBC, CBC Radio, as well as CBC Television. We're live streaming too. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks so much for joining us. And we'll continue our discussion on what should a youth jobs strategy look like. And this is amid record youth unemployment that's been the highest since 2010, if you exclude the pandemic years. And so the BC Conservatives are calling for a youth jobs strategy, asking you what should that look like. We'll talk to an economist coming up in our next half hour, and we'll continue to take your calls. Right now, it's time for a CBC News update.
Good afternoon. Police now say a suspected impaired driver is being investigated for Friday night's collision on the Coquihalla that left 2 women dead. A pickup traveling in the wrong direction collided with a Hyundai Kona near Kamloops. A 36-year-old woman and a 27-year-old woman in the Hyundai were killed. 3 other people have serious injuries. Interior Health is getting rid of 91 administrative positions. 70 of those jobs are currently vacant. The Health Authority's website shows the budget for this year was just over $4.2 million, with an increase of net debt of nearly $150,000. And the provincial government says its last offer to the province's public service workers includes a 4.5% compensation increase over 2 years. The province says the union is asking for an increase of nearly 16%. Meanwhile, the BC General Employees Union says it will expand its picket lines this week to a number of government offices and service locations. And now the forecast. A severe thunderstorm watch is in place for several regions of the interior. On the north coast, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 16, highs up to 26 with sunshine and local smoke in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, sunny with local smoke and a high of 24. Highs in the mid-20s with increasing cloudiness and smoke in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, cloudy and smoky with a high of 25. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with highs around 19. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you so much, Rob. That's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. And some of the tributes now that we're hearing from the worlds of hockey and federal politics for former Hall of Famer and Liberal Cabinet Minister Ken Dryden. Dryden died on Friday at the age of 78 after a battle with cancer. Now, on the ice, he served as a goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens with 6 Stanley Cup victories under his belt. A big career highlight, of course, was helping Team Canada score the generation-defining victory at the 1972 Summit Series. And later in politics, he was Minister of Social Development under the government of then Prime Minister Paul Martin. His teammate at the House of Commons, Vancouver Centre MP Hedy Fry, spoke about his legacy on the Early Edition this morning.
He's the kind of guy that you think about and you smile. I know his history in hockey, but as a politician, I'll tell you, Ken Dryden is the Renaissance man of our times. He was brilliant intellectually. He had a high EQ as well as a high IQ. In other words, he cared a great deal, but in a way that was not just warm and fuzzy. He actually had great ideas. Ken would always sit down and make you inspired when he talked to you. He always had ideas. He had this, Canada was for him the best country in the world, and he really believed it down to his toes. And everything that he would talk about Canada was a vision for this country that was compassionate and great and took risks and stepped up to the bar. And so you couldn't help but be inspired by Ken.
.34 now. You're with BC Today. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Michelle Elliott, and we are continuing our conversation about youth unemployment. The latest job numbers from Statistics Canada show 14.5% of young people were unable to find work in August. That is the worst employment situation for people aged 15 to 24 since September 2010. That's excluding 2020 and 2021 during the pandemic. We would like to hear from you. What do you think a youth job strategy should look like, and how do we help young people find jobs? You can call us now. Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca, and we are watching your comments on TikTok. My next guest is Marco Sciascia. He's the manager of the RiseUP youth program in Victoria. Hi, Marco. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
What do you think is the job market situation that young people are facing right now? How would you describe it?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. I think obviously it's reflective of the broader economic downtrends, but I think a lot of the social aspect of things is kind of being underemphasized, right? When we see lack of jobs, what we're also really seeing is lack of community integration, lack of social exposure, lack of relationships. And for so many people, that was so pivotal for so long, where the hiring practices were based around who you knew and who you could talk to and knowing what was going on in your community, knowing the businesses. Whereas now, with the shift to almost entirely online hiring, automated practices, the same rules don't apply. And so any kind of social leg up that people once had, or any kind of community integration pieces that once served as kind of a stepping stone for jobs, don't exist. And as the technology and the procedures rapidly change, youth just aren't supported to keep up.
Right. Do you just fill out that online application, and who knows if someone's actually looking at it in the first place?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, and 95% of the time, nobody is looking at the resume, right? And so unless you're able to, kind of socially engineer your resume in a way where like the certain keywords that need to be picked up on are there, yeah,
Right.
you don't even make it by this first kind of automated round. And so it's entirely discouraging.
So when you hear that we need a youth job strategy, what comes to mind for you? What's needed?
Yeah, I think obviously education is a huge piece. When I say education, again, I mean education around the changing tides of what hiring practices look like, right? If these things are going to be almost entirely online, then there needs to be the supports that can help you keep up with that. Again, those kind of practices as well do particularly create barriers for lower socioeconomic status folks in rural areas, folks who don't have the same access to technology or technology education. So it needs to be kind of a widespread effort. But as well, I think a focus on more customized employment, recognizing, as has been spoken about, this idea that youth are overwhelmed. They're in school. There are higher rates of anxiety and other mental health at that age demographic than there have been in potentially ever. There needs to be a form of employment and a form of hiring practices that says, yeah, these kids don't have the time or the mental capacity to be working 30 hours a week. How can we be a little bit more understanding and recognize it as part of the bigger picture of them, moving towards adolescence, moving towards, going off to university or whatever it may be.
Let's take some calls. Marco Sciascia is joining me, manager of the RiseUP youth program in Victoria, as we ask you, what do you think a youth job strategy would look like? And this is in the face of rising youth unemployment across Canada. Our numbers again are 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950, or just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Hands-free if you are driving. You can pull over and do that, or email bctoday@cbc.ca, and our TikTok Live is up. You can just catch us at CBC British Columbia. Jacob is calling us now from North Delta. Hi, Jacob.
Hello. How's it going?
I am well. How does this unemployment rate affect you?
Well, for me, it hasn't necessarily taken a huge role into my life, just as I do have a career in trades. So I have been relatively protected from job insecurity through this August. But what I would say that I do know a lot about is my generation, being born 2000 myself. I know a lot of what goes on in the mental of those aged 15 to 24. I've spoken with old high school teachers of mine, and they say that the kids those are teaching right now, They're really not engaged. They're all on their cell phones, and they really don't give a two hoots about what they could be learning in class. And I think there's also not enough influence bringing kids towards trades educations. There's been a lot of like, let's push giving UBC and SFU a bunch of tuition money because we want to collect, Gen X's paychecks, whereas kids can be going to school, getting their educations paid for, and making really good money within only 5 years of putting time into an education, right?
Yeah. It's funny, Jacob, I've been hearing this conversation about the need for young people to be encouraged to go into trades, and that it is a viable career option. And here you are. It sounds like you're finding success in it, or job security anyway. How does it feel when you hear from your teachers who say young people are disengaged, are too much into their phones? I mean, I can imagine young people. I have kids myself who are teenagers who just think, well, that's society now, and is that an unfair criticism of this generation?
I mean, there's a lot, I think, that comes down to screen time and the fact that there's so much global tension in the world right now. Things are really just very, very like, why bother? I think I spoke to the gentleman. I said, gave a why should I care? Like, why do I want to go to work? These are things that I could be saying, right? Why do I want to commute 3 hours every day from downtown to where I live and not get to spend time on my hobbies and do that for 40 hours? It's not that you're working 40 hours a week. You're working like 60 hours a week because you're commuting, right? So the 40-hour work week, I think, is something that gives a lot of young kids, like, why do I want to see that as my life? And there's not a lot of, like, solutions being brought up. There's not a lot of, like, say what you want about Christy Clark and the BC Conservatives, but that SkyTrain should have been built like 10 years ago, right? And these kids, like my generation, we see that. We're like, I don't want to work hard because there's no reward in it. There's no house to buy for us, right? It's very much like Sisyphus pushes the boulder up the hill, but this boulder almost can't be moved.
That sounds highly discouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You're saying, what then, you said solutions. What do you think are the solutions? Is it expanding transportation? It sounds like that's something you'd like.
For sure. I'd love to jump on that right away. Yeah. Like, as soon as the Highway 1 improvements get done and the Fraser Highway transit is improved, we need to start building a train that goes out to Abbotsford, because the more you improve public transit, the lower housing prices go down. And that's just a known fact. I don't know if the gentleman economist has spoken already, but as soon as public transit improves, rent prices go down, because why would I pay the margin to live in the city when I can commute to the city?
Jacob,
public transit for sure, yeah.
Yeah. How old are you, by the way, Jacob, if I may ask?
I turned 25 in April. I was born April 18th, 2000. That's like public information now, I guess.
You did mention it off the top. Yes, 2000. Well, it really, really good to hear from you, being a Gen Z young person yourself, and hearing that perspective. Thank you so much. I'm glad you called.
Yeah, no worries. Take care. Thank you so much.
You too. That's Jacob in North Delta. Marco Sciascia, he's sort of echoing what you're saying, right? It's beyond what the job listings are, even beyond whether young people can get into an interview even. It's sort of this overall environment that seems to be discouraging young people from getting out there and looking for work.
Yeah, no, I think he makes a fantastic point when he talks about that overwhelming sort of social feeling of why bother. Because we also have to, it's so easy to blame the youth themselves, but we have to kind of look around and say, okay, but who's teaching them these attitudes? Who's teaching them these lessons, right? when youth listen to their parents talk about the skyrocketing costs of living, of housing, of food, like Jacob mentioned, global tensions, breaking out everywhere, and more isolation that is brought on by the advent of these different technologies. There is this sense of, why should I break my back for 45 years earning, below what I deserve, just to rent for the rest of my life and barely be able to make ends meet. And I think, you really cannot overemphasize the general social sort of doom feeling that is kind of sinking in through the cracks.
I can hear, and not to put a generational gap or difference here and pit generations against each other, but others may be listening thinking, well, you just to make a living and to be able to afford a home. And is that not motivation enough? What do you say to that?
I think to those folks, and again, not to make a kind of a generational divide, but I think there is also kind of a lack of understanding or awareness in that, in the 60s, a single income family could afford a house, they could afford vacations, they could afford 2 cars and a dog. Now, if you try to, a single income family is going to end up on the streets, and a dual income family in so many situations, especially in BC, is again going to still be living paycheck to paycheck. The great reward that we were taught was there, or that we teach the youth was there, doesn't align in the way that it used to. So we have to look at our own perception and our own kind of understanding of where the times are at.
Let's take another call here. Jack in Port Hardy. What do you think is needed to put together a youth job strategy? What would help young people find work, Jack?
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Thinking we need pretty well a new social contract at this point. Things have fallen apart, as our last caller there was saying, and as you two were going over. Well, what hope do the youth that are entering the job market right now have for successful employment, for being able to support themselves, when look just between at the news sections on this show, we're talking about labor disputes, strikes, and this is not the first time it's been talked about in recent times.
No.
This is established patterns of systematic destruction of our ability to engage in collective bargaining. Our youth are looking at that. They see that, and they're probably not too pleased with it.
It sounds like you're a young person yourself, Jack?
30.
Yeah. What do you see as a solution? I was going to ask you, when you say things are falling apart, what specifically you're talking about. It sounds like, you're observing the labor disputes that are happening. There have been a few.
Exactly.
And so what kind of motivation is that for someone who is looking to go into work? What kinds of solutions might there be then?
Well, like they're not going to get a job at Canada Post right now. Not going to get a job with the dock workers unions. Solutions, we've been talking about them for quite a while now. We've got basic income as a potential, and quite frankly, stop letting the government break into labor negotiations and shut things down just when progress is starting to be made.
Okay, so you're talking about, for example, Air Canada, Canada Post, and the federal government intervening there, or in Canada Post's situation, ordering back to work as well. Jack, thank you very much.
I couldn't name you a single strike that hasn't been interfered with.
Jack, thank you so much. I appreciate your call as well. So we're here. It's so interesting hearing from the younger people calling in, saying these are the conditions that we're in there, and the influence that these conditions are placing on us when it comes to whether we even feel motivated to look for work. That's a couple of callers now that we've had. Liz in Victoria. Hi, Liz. Thanks so much for calling in.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah. What goes through your mind listening to this conversation?
Well, I just want to say I'm so happy to hear things going in a direction of acknowledging the wider context, because when I initially called, we had just heard the BC Conservative guest talking about blaming immigrants, talking about how if we just support small businesses, this will all be fixed. By the way, the only time I got a raise at the small business I work at was when we unionized. So I really strongly recommend young folks look into unionization. It's really easy to get it started. Just contact a union. They can tell you how to do it. Worker power is the only thing that's going to fix this. Fixing the context is the only thing that's going to fix things for the young people. You can't eliminate child poverty without eliminating poverty for everyone, and it's going to be the same situation for the jobs. You can't make jobs better for youth without fixing the imbalance of power between those who have a huge amount of capital and the workers. We know the money is out there. It's the responsibility of the provincial government to tax in a way that is fair. That means getting a large amount of money from wealthy corporations, wealthy individuals, and running society. For example, making a fair deal with these striking BCGEU workers. We're hearing him say he doesn't have the money. That's just him admitting he's not doing his job.
You're talking about the Premier.
That he does it. Yeah, we need to demand that he do his job. There is enough money flowing through these places. In BC,
we are the province, and pardon me, Liz, but the province is in record deficit as well, right?
Yes, that's them not doing their job because they are the ones who set the corporate tax rate. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Is that a bigger situation than the provincial government not doing its job when you look at, again, economic uncertainty, trade relations with the United States and tariffs and the impact of that?
We're hearing at the provincial and the federal level, we're hearing politicians point to that and say that that's why we have to have austerity. That's why we can't pay public workers. That's why we can't have services. They will always say that. The working class people have to band together and fight back. We know that the biggest players are making enough money and that we can capture that money and run society. And we can't let them lie to us. We have to stand together.
Liz, thank you so much for the call from Victoria. Good to hear from you as well. That's Liz in Victoria. Marco, what do you make of that? It's expanding and broadening into news of the day when it comes to those labor negotiations as well. What impact does that have on young people?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a pretty stark world to be entering into when you're just kind of getting into the swing of things in terms of, again, becoming an adolescent, becoming a young adult, figuring out what the working world looks like, and in many ways, obviously, it is strange for them, but I do think there is quite a lot of value in youth getting a real world lesson on labor disputes, on rights in the workplace, on unions, because I think that is information and understanding that serves them well as they go on. I mean, something that we talk with our clients a lot about is this idea that you either in a workplace need to be a strong self-advocate, or you need to find the folks that are going to advocate for you. And a union is such a fantastic place to start with that. And so I think in a way, young people being able to understand the power imbalances that create some of these inequalities and these systems of oppression and these feelings of fear and anxiety around the workplace, around entering the workforce, returning some of the power and the understanding to them is maybe one of the most empowering experiences for a youth to go through, especially at such a pivotal kind of entry point.
We're talking about youth unemployment reaching 14.5%, the highest since 2010 if you exclude 2020 and 2021. And so now we're hearing calls for a youth employment or youth job strategy from the BC Conservatives. We've been asking you, what do you think that should look like? Our next caller is Darwin up in Terrace. Hi, Darwin. Welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you?
I am fine. Hey, what are your thoughts?
So just from what I've seen in my local area, we have kind of older workers that in terms of like their college age, what you can expect from a college age, more mature person, you wouldn't necessarily ask of a high school student. I feel like that kind of plays into it factors into the lower unemployment rate for the younger youth. We've seen quite the explosion of international students, and again, like I can totally see it from a business standpoint. to have somebody who is a little more mature that you can give a little more responsibility to, but at the same time, like these younger youth need the opportunity to be able to break out into these, these entry-level jobs where they can learn those team building, all that stuff, right? These life skills that they need going forward that you could only get when you when you started off as a teenager, flipping burgers or whatever it might be, right? Serving coffees at Tim Hortons.
Yeah, Darwin, thank you very much for the call too and sharing what you see in Terrace. Bonnie is next now, our final caller today in Nelson. Hi, Bonnie. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, I was just writing you. I didn't think I'd get on.
Yeah, I've got a minute. So
Yes,
tell me
but
what
I
you
can
think
say I've been
of youth unemployment.
Well, we organized the youth group here in Nelson. Yeah, and I was just saying, when I was young, I'm 79, when I was young in the United States, very young, I could get a job walking into a business because I had a few, skills, right? And I could just get a job. And they only want to work 20 hours a week, that guy? Why doesn't he hire 2 people? And my husband used to work 36-hour days, and then he had 4 days off.
Okay.
And that was back years and years and years ago.
So
there
more...
are solutions. There are lots of solutions out there.
Yeah.
But there's a whole movement of people who don't want us to think that it can be any other way than the way it is.
Okay. Bonnie, thank you very much. I have to wrap it up there as I have a minute left, Bonnie. Thank you so much for the call. One email here saying that I have been advertising for yard work for months and never got a bite. I have my own tools, provide a healthy wage at $23 per hour. Fortunately, found someone on the Penticton Cash Jobs site. But what is it with youth and jobs these days? Thank you very much for the email as well. bctoday@cbc.ca. Marco Sciascia, I really appreciate having you on the show and giving your perspective as someone who works with young people and having that within this conversation about youth unemployment. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Marco Sciascia is the manager of the RiseUP youth program in Victoria. Thanks again for all of your calls. You can still email us bctoday@cbc.ca. Thanks again for joining us on BC Today. We will be back with you in a moment on your streaming platforms to carry a live press conference from the RCMP. And we'll bring that to you live coming up at 1 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Elliott. In just a few moments, we are going to hear from the RCMP, who are providing an update on escaped convicted murderer Rabi Al-Khalil. Al-Khalil escaped from a BC prison in 2022, where he was being held on murder charges. He has been on the loose ever since. He was convicted on 2 murders in Vancouver and Toronto in 2012 and was a member of Canada's most wanted list after that escape. The press conference is about to start, but ahead of the conference, RCMP have not confirmed if Al-Khalil has been arrested, and we are waiting for that press conference to start any moment now, and we'll bring that to you live. Here is the press conference. Let's go live to the RCMP.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Corporal Sarbjeet Sangha, Media Relation Officer with Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit of BC. Name is spelled S-A-R-B-J-I-T. Sangha, S-A-N-G-H-A. I have Sergeant Tammy Law with me today. She's the spokesperson, Media Relation Officer for Federal Policing Pacific Region. And we also have Corporal Alex Berube. He'll be our French spokesperson today. Alex will be available for French questions, and I'll be available for any Punjabi interviews after the press conference. This news conference has been in planning stages for some time. However, we are aware that there are unconfirmed media reports that Robbie Al-Khalil is in custody. However, we do not have confirmation of his arrest. We will not be able to provide any further information in regard to this matter. If that information changes, we will update you accordingly. This press conference is about the arrest of 3 men who have been charged in the investigation into the escape of Robbie Al-Khalil. During that investigation, police gathered further information that resulted in the prevention of a murder in Kamloops. As well, we were able to lay charges in a shooting in Maple Ridge. So now that I have addressed the unconfirmed media reports, I'm going to inform you the details of this press conference. We are pleased to share a significant development: the arrest of individuals who have been charged in the escape of Robbie Al-Khalil. And this escape occurred in 2022 in the North Fraser Pretrial Center in Coquitlam. In July 2023, CFSU BC took over the investigation, and in December 2023, a joint project between CFSU BC and Federal Policing Pacific Region was started. We have now secured 17 charges against 5 individuals, and 3 of them were directly involved in the prison breach that led to Robbie Al-Khalil's escape. Sergeant Lobb will now read the news release in English, followed by Corporal Berube, who will read it in French. Then we will take your questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Sergeant Tammy Lobb, Media Relations Officer with Federal Policing Pacific Region. That's Tammy Lobb, spelled T-A-M-M-Y, L-O-B-B. The Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit of British Columbia and the RCMP Federal Policing Pacific Region confirmed charges have been approved against 3 men who allegedly assisted in the escape of Robbie Al-Khalil from the North Fraser Pretrial Center 3 years ago. On July 21st, 2022, Coquitlam RCMP responded to an incident at the pretrial center after 2 men posing as contractors aided in the escape of Al-Khalil, who remains at large. In February 2023, the Al-Khalil investigation was transferred to CFSU BC, with Federal Policing Pacific Region joining the operation later that year. The BC Prosecution Service has approved charges against 3 men for their roles in Al-Khalil's escape. Those individuals are Edward Ayoub, 48 of Ottawa, John Potvin, 49 of Ottawa, and Ryan Van Gool, 46 of Harrison Hot Springs. They have each been charged with conspiracy to commit a prison breach and prison breach. In March of 2024, while conducting the Al-Khalil investigation, police uncovered information that has now led to additional charges against Ryan Van Gool and 2 men for allegedly conspiring to murder an individual in Kamloops. Ryan Van Gool, Bryce Telford, 28 years old of Surrey, and Scott Telford, 61 of Surrey, are each charged with conspiracy to commit murder, possession of a loaded restricted firearm, and possession of a loaded prohibited firearm. In addition, Ryan Van Gool has been charged with discharging a firearm with intent and possession of a loaded prohibited or restricted firearm in relation to an incident that took place in Maple Ridge in January 2024. In terms of the current status of all those arrested and charged, Ryan Van Gool, Bryce Telford, and Scott Telford were arrested on September 5th and remain in custody. Their next court appearance is on September 10th at the Vancouver Law Courts. Edward Ayoub is already in custody for a matter in another province and is facing these new charges. John Potvin is currently wanted on a Canada-wide warrant for these charges. We ask the public become familiar with his photo today and contact their local police with any information regarding his whereabouts. All 17 charges against the 5 individuals are by direct indictment, meaning the charges will go straight to trial without a preliminary inquiry. CFSCU BC and Federal Policing Pacific Region would like to acknowledge and thank the Ottawa Police Service for their vital role in this investigation, as well as Coquitlam, Kamloops, and Ridge Meadows RCMP detachments. I will now turn it over to Corporal Alex Berube, who will now read the media release in French.
You're listening to CBC as we take you live to an RCMP press conference in which they are addressing reports around media reports that they say are unconfirmed that escaped convicted killer Rabi Al-Khalil has been arrested. You heard the RCMP spokesperson there, Corporal Sarbjit Sangha, say they do not have confirmation of that arrest. What they did talk about at this press conference is about the arrest of 3 men who have been charged in the investigation into the escape of Rabi Al-Khalil in December 2022. And they say they have secured charges against a number of individuals, and they have arrested 3 men who they say allegedly helped Rabi Al-Khalil escape in 2022. And 3 have been charged with conspiracy to commit a prison breach as well as prison breach. And you also heard there from the RCMP Sergeant Tammy Lobb saying that one of those 3 men, along with 2 other men, have been charged in a separate murder. And so you heard her laying out the charges there. But again, no confirmation from RCMP right now when it comes to unconfirmed reports in the media that Rabi Al-Khalil has been arrested. So no confirmation there. Instead, talking about charges that have been laid against 3 men in the investigation into the escape of Rabi Al-Khalil. Let's go live back now to the press conference.
Contre une personne au mois de mars 2024 à Kamloops. Chacun des hommes fait également l'objet de 2 chefs de possession d'une arme à feu, autorisation restreinte chargée et possession d'une arme à feu prohibée chargée. Les individus faisant face aux accusations en question sont les suivants: Ryan Van Gool, Bryce Telford, âgé de 28 ans et originaire de Surrey, Scott Telford, âgé de 61 ans et originaire de Surrey. En outre, Ryan Van Gool a été accusé de décharge d'une arme à feu avec une intention particulière et de possession d'une arme à feu prohibée ou à autorisation restreinte chargée relativement à un incident survenu à Maple Ridge au mois de janvier 2024. Ryan Van Gool, Bryce Telford et Scott Telford ont été arrêtés le 5 septembre 2025 et demeurent sous la garde de la police. Leur prochaine comparution est prévue le 10 septembre 2025.
Okay, as the RCMP provide the update in French, let's go through some of the background on the Al
Telford, Telford, and Scott Telford, Scotttelford.
And in terms of what they're charged with, Edward Ayub, John Potwin, Ryan Van Gool, all three of them are charged with conspiracy to commit prison breach, as well prison breach. Ryan Van Gool, Bryce Telford, and Scott Telford are also charged with attempt murder in a Kamloops investigation, and Ryan Van Gool is charged with further accounts of firearm with discharge firearm with intent and possession of a restricted prohibited weapon. So that part of the investigation remains ongoing. This is still an active investigation. There are more people that may be facing charges at a later date. I won't go into details of exactly what their role was in this investigation, but I can clarify for you that 3 individuals, Edward Ayub, John Potwin, and Ryan Van Gool, were directly involved in the conspiracy to commit prison breach as well as prison breach. First, I will acknowledge that the video did help the investigators to identify this individual. Secondly, as this investigation is in court, I won't be able to go into details exactly who was on that video. They have been arrested. Thank you.
Like we said earlier, at this point, we cannot confirm that Robbie Alcohil has been arrested. What I can tell you is, generally speaking, as your federal police agency, as you know, we conduct investigations that are national in scope, and whenever we're a part of any joint operation, what we bring to the table is specialized units, intelligence capabilities, and those international connections. And in this case, those have all been prevalent from the very beginning, and they continue to be. But when it comes to whether or not we can confirm that Robbie Alcohil has been arrested, we cannot confirm that at this time. However, if there is an update, we will certainly update you. At this time, the investigation is ongoing, and as your police agencies who are conducting this investigation, that information has not been confirmed yet. When there is an announcement to be made, we will definitely inform you. But that information has not been confirmed through the police agencies at this time. We understand that there is a high level of public and media interest in this case. And like we've said, we cannot confirm at this time that he has been arrested. Again, as you know, as your federal police agency and the RCMP, we have channels and systems in place when people have left the country and they are wanted. But in this case, we cannot confirm with you today that he has been arrested.
You have been listening to the RCMP Federal Pacific Policing Region and Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit holding a press conference there that they say had been in the works for some time. And this was to speak about charges against 3 people in relation to helping convicted killer Rabi Al-Khalil escape from a BC prison in 2022. Now, Al-Khalil was being held in the North Fraser Pretrial Center in Port Coquitlam on murder charges when he escaped in 2022. He had been convicted in a 2012 Toronto murder as well as a murder in Vancouver that same year. He was on Canada's most wanted list after that escape. Now, 3 men have been charged with helping Al-Khalil escape: Edward Ayub from Ottawa, John Potvin from Ottawa, and Ryan Van Gool from Harrison Hot Springs. And the 3 are charged with conspiracy to commit prison breach and prison breach. As you heard, Van Gool, along with 2 other men, Bryce Telford and Scott Telford, also face charges in relation to a murder in Kamloops, and Van Gool faces weapons-related charges. Now, the RCMP spokespersons were pressed on media reports that Al-Khalil had been arrested. They insisted they could not confirm that and said an investigation is ongoing, but again repeated that the information is not confirmed. Okay, we'll continue to follow this case here on CBC, so stay tuned to all platforms, and you can always check our website for the latest. That's cbc.ca/BC. I'm